At the start of 2023, I made a video discussing a little-known roguelike MMO bullet hell game called Realm of the Mad God, also known as RotMG, because I've been a long-time fan of the game. In this said video, I covered most of what the game had to offer, whether that was the good or the bad. So going into all of this, I knew that opinions on the game would be varied, but the comments I've received on the video were certainly not what I expected. The majority of them were one-sided, either hating on the game or loving it. It was very clear to me that people do not like the fundamentals and how this game has been handled by Deca Games, the game's current developer and publisher. On the other hand, there are also people who adore this game to its very core. I was blown away by the contrast, considering that my opinions on the game are pretty mixed, so much so that I made a tweet about it because I was surprised. I honestly thought more people would share my opinions too, or at least share them in the comments section. Couple that with commenters informing me of things I may have skimmed over or not covered, and I've realized that despite how people feel about the game, a lot of people still wish the best for it. But even so, the divide this community has is massive, and I'm going to discuss why this little games community is so divided and who is responsible for it. So if you haven't watched this video of mine here, I'd encourage you to do so if you want to catch up on what you missed. I'd also encourage you to subscribe and like the video if you end up enjoying my content, but either way, I'll be giving a quick summary on what RotMG is just to get everyone re-familiarized and up to speed. In this game, you pick a character from 18 of the game's unique classes, go out into the realms and slay enemies of neutral affiliations and minions of Oryx, the Mad God, in the overworld or in dungeons until you hit level 20. From there, you slay more minions, gods, and crazier enemies to level up your stats through obtaining stat potions, all while finding better loot to make it all just a little bit easier. But once enough of Oryx's minions have been slain, Oryx will summon you to his castle. Storm the castle, kick his booty, and then try your luck at his two other incarnations if you want more of a challenge, and then rinse and repeat. Just keep going until your character dies. And once they die, they're permanently dead and you have to start all over. If you're smart, you'll have stored away gear in your vault to make getting back to where you were and beyond easier too. Now we're all up to scratch and we can focus on the issues at hand. Division, the love, and the hate. It's almost like a domino effect. One factor affects another, which affects another, and so on. So let's start here at the dungeons, which I consider to be the juiciest parts of the game. They're all rated from 0 to 10, with 0 being the easiest and 10 being the hardest. So obviously, the hardest dungeons offer the biggest challenges, which really put the hell in bullet hell. Oh, and the best loot, which arguably can be found at Oryx's Sanctuary, where Oryx's third and final incarnation lies. This all makes sense and works to help progress your character. And I've had one comment point that out too, while also asking what the problem with that is, because I do have an issue with it. The issue is that it leaves other dungeons in the dust, meaning that a lot of people would just avoid them entirely because the rewards aren't as good as higher rated dungeons. This leaves players with a few dungeons to run over and over again if they want to get the best gear, creating zero variety. Sure, dungeons can drop with modifiers that give players more rewards and make them easier or harder, which gives incentive to jump into that dungeon, but most of the time, it's not enough. How a lot of other MMOs get around this sort of thing is by implementing harder versions of dungeons. Final Fantasy XIV does this perfectly. I can search for a dungeon that's scaled to my level and I get rewards based on that scaling. I don't think that system can be copy-pasted into RotMG, but something similar or inspired by a system like that can create more variety in what dungeons are run. Like a system that incorporates the terrible daily quests to make it all better. Maybe have harder versions of dungeons drop from gods, harder versions of gods by using an item or a voting system. So the Haunted Cemetery, but in brackets, hard or exalted, that maybe adds a few new enemies or final bosses, and obviously, better rewards and unique rewards that are upgraded versions of certain UT or ST gear. Or, I don't know, some upgrade and forge materials. Intertwine this with the daily quest system and you can set up dailies for people to do that might have them do a lower tier dungeon, but you don't get a chest with random items you may not need. You'd get something like a massive fame reward, food, potions or gear rewards that don't require running a dungeon 4 times. A simple fix like this will create more gameplay options for the player. I mean, imagine an exalted pirate cave with another boss after the first one to beat and some new UT gear that can be looted and upgraded to compete with some of the higher tier gear. I think this could bridge the great divide between casual and hardcore players. Casual players will still get to play the dungeons they find fun and comfortable to run before hitting harder dungeons and harder versions of their favorites, and hardcore players will have more late game dungeon options to choose from. Everyone wins and both of these player types will intersect with one another. After all, this is an MMO. It gets awfully lonely soloing dungeons and teamwork is a huge part of the game. But let's step back to reality. We don't have a system like this. We have a system that rewards players for diving into the deep end to hit late game as early as possible through running specific dungeons. These dungeons can be pretty hard to come by too. So to skip waiting for a lot of them to drop from enemies and bosses, you can purchase keys, which is something I forgot to mention in my previous video. When used, these keys will spawn a specific dungeon portal for you and anyone else to enter. You can buy keys for 50 to 200 realm gold, which is a few US dollars, or 200 to 600 drachma. Get them as a random loot drop or as a daily login reward. They can also be refined so that you can put modifiers on the dungeons. So yeah, these keys pretty much eliminate the time it takes to find a specific enemy, slay that enemy and hope it drops a dungeon that you want. You can use these keys in public spaces, but you'll get more out of them if you use them in more organized spaces like the bazaar, your guild hall with guild buddies, or with friends. But you'll get the most out of them if you organize Discord runs. I'll be real, I was a bit out of the loop and I didn't know Discord runs were as big as they were, but oh boy, they are massive. So massive that this is where the domino effect has led us. Keys eliminate the time it takes to find a dungeon, but communication with other players over Discord or other social medias eliminates the efforts it takes to spawn certain overworld event bosses and anger Oryx. You can just sit there and wait for someone to give you the green light and say, "Yo, Oryx is about to close this realm in this server, hop in now." And then you go, you're in without having to help out and get to that stage, and you and your buddies can raid a realm and have a blast at the expense of other players, whether they know it or not. The same goes for dungeons and overworld bosses. Here comes those words again: division, divide. The most hardcore of players stick to their own key and raid runs, while casuals sort of just play, leaving both players separated from each other until they meet in an endgame dungeon. This is, of course, generalized, but what's worse is that beginners in the current state of the game have little to no support from veteran players. I remember a time when old and new players used to congregate in realms together, whether that be to farm for fame, level up, share loot, or run newer and older dungeons together, considering how much more spread out drops used to be. As a new player, you would learn from watching other players play and have their beefed up characters make dungeons and bosses easier to learn and get a hold of. Discord runs straight up eliminate this process, leaving beginners and casual players with little to no one to help them take on a dungeon. Like I already stated, this is an MMO. Teamwork will be needed. To further this, every class has their strengths and weaknesses. A melee character can only face tank so much before they need someone to heal them, and a ranged class that can heal needs a tank to stay in the front line to keep them safe. So if there's no one around to help you and balance out your class's weaknesses while you're feeling your way through the game, well then, good luck. And this also has had a massive consequence on the population of people in realms. They feel so empty. Every now and again, after completing a dungeon, I'll have to run to the Godlands from the beach area because there's no one else in the realm I'm in to teleport to. Gone are the days of the emphasis of cooperative play and fun competition for loot with players in a public setting. A lot of people would rather just optimize their time and organize runs. And it's not like organized runs weren't a thing before Discord. You had people making small communities over Skype, TeamSpeak, etc. to organize key runs, but at this time in the early to mid 2010s, there was still a lot of people roaming the realms with random players. Now we're at a whole new level, and unfortunately, you need some sort of communication to coordinate and navigate the endgame dungeons because they are tough as nails. But that's how endgame MMO dungeons have always worked, right? You don't want to wait for a dungeon to drop just for a random person to pull a few enemies to your group just for you to have to teleport back to the Nexus to save your character. The coordination that comes with communicating when to join a realm and what keys to run with who just makes everything so much more easier for those who want to run the same dungeons over and over again. And in the end, that's also how you learn how to do dungeons, from watching better players do them and from running them. So this is pretty much the game's version of something like a dungeon browser that traditional MMOs have, and it does work well, except it has negative effects on the larger scale of the game, just like I've pointed out. If this is the state of running dungeons efficiently, then why don't beginners just join in? Well, they could if they knew how to join in on one, assuming the organizers are okay with new players. But if you're a new player, unless you've watched a bunch of videos about the game already, how would you know to do this? You'd just be playing the game and roaming through empty realms aimlessly thinking that this game's dead, Lamau, all alone. And there are other factors that would push players away from playing in realms outside of Discord runs, and that is what the game offers players: items that max levels or stats. You can buy them or get them as daily login, quest, or event rewards. These are a detriment to the game because they cut out the early and mid game to race you to the end game by leveling you up to max level or by maxing out one of your stats. And yes, I've been guilty of doing this to avoid getting to level 20 and to avoid grinding for speed and dex potions. And again, it keeps certain players in their end game areas and newer players in their lower game areas. So who or what is at fault? Don't hate the player, hate the game, because the game is set up like this and players have to adjust how they play it to get the most out of it. If organizing runs is the most efficient way to maximize your time and effort, then why wouldn't you do it if you wanted some serious loot? So really, it's the core gameplay and mechanics that players are just trying to overcome. And that begs the question, does the roguelike and MMO genre clash too much? After all, it's an incredibly ambitious mix of genres that was created at a game jam. A commenter recently claimed that they are a tester for the game and have had to watch designers be let go that would have brought needed changes to the core mechanics of the game. They also state that an ex-tester said the genre clash doesn't work at a fundamental level before reiterating what we already know. Now, whether or not this commenter is telling the truth is up for debate, but it still puts the game's genres into question. I believe that at a fundamental level, a roguelike MMO can work, but RotMG slips up a bit. Let's start at the building blocks, the foundations, and make our way up. Players level up to 20 by taking out enemies, and then they start making their stats stronger while collecting better loot and getting fame. That's fine for the most part, except for the fame. Not a single roguelike game encourages you to die on purpose unless it's for an incredibly good reason that might have some sort of high risk, high reward mechanic attached to it. RotMG could have that in the form of a risky new game plus or something, but the closest thing we have is fame. Fame is ass, and its system is flawed because RotMG runs don't last an hour like other big roguelike runs do. These can last days, weeks, months, maybe even years. So dying in other roguelikes feels fine. You die, have some sort of currency you can use to upgrade your character, hub world, or buy equipment for the next run, and then go again. What can you do in RotMG after a week-long run? Well, I don't know, I guess upgrade your pet, but even that gets really expensive. Maybe buy some equipment. And if you can afford this stuff easily, then you probably don't even need to buy it, considering that you'll probably have better gear stored away. So Fame needs to incorporate more roguelike elements into it, and it needs to be more player friendly. To do so, you can incorporate the exaltation system into it. Long story short, exaltations give permanent stat increases to your classes for completing certain endgame dungeons. So why not make this more accessible to players by giving them exaltations or a system similar to that for running more early or mid-game dungeons? Stat increase rewards are cool, but we can get more out of it. You know, rewards that increase the potency and abilities of your forge, upgrade your vault, allow you to customize your vault, etc. I'm just spitballing here. You could even lean more into the MMO side of things too, like having upgrade quests or story quests for NPCs that don't exist but should. And then from there, have stuff that costs fame tuned down a bit, and maybe even have fame be collected in real time, and then when you die, you get the bonuses after that. Wait, hold on, actually, now that I think about it, at this point, do we even need to have levels? Why not just start off at 1 fame, or even scale how much stats you get per level up? It could go up or down. Preferably up, but scaling up would mean that the endgame could be more easily approached since there'd be less grinding. But less grinding means less time in early and mid game, and less help for beginners. Not necessarily, because the old endgame would then become the new mid-game, or at least be a bit of mid-game and endgame. But then again, the hard mode and exaltations mode I suggested for dungeons, hey, that could be incorporated too. I'd also suggest that the stat pool gets bigger, whether that means that the max stat goes beyond 75 or we get new stats. This would also make the current endgame dungeons easier to attempt and allow a bigger endgame to be created with dungeons that go beyond that. And also, the power creep should continue as new major updates are rolled out. Not just to gear, which happens, but to stats too, which doesn't. It just makes sense. Some of these are not the most stable of ideas since there would need to be a lot of thought that goes into it, but I don't think these ideas are bad. Death needs a whole rework too. It can be incredibly hard to die, but also incredibly easy. Not knowing a boss pattern and getting overwhelmed or getting shotgunned is a common and frustrating way to die. The first one is a bit of a skill issue and you can patiently ease your way into certain dungeons and learn, but getting shotgunned? That's a term that describes getting blasted by a bunch of bullets and pretty much just dying. I don't have footage of it, but that stupid train overworld boss took out my long-standing knight because it flew on screen and shotgunned him before I could even react to it. So let's hit 2 birds with 1 stone. Shotguns and sight. It's a bullet hell. To stop this, shotguns can be nerfed to do less damage. So say you get hit by 5 bullets at once that do 100 damage each. Instead of taking, say, 500 damage, you take 300 due to some formula that nerfs damage depending on how many bullets you get hit with. An invulnerability system might be a good idea as an alternative too. Get shotgunned, get put on red flashing screen health and become invulnerable for a second or so. Now I also mentioned sight. What I'm referring to is what is loaded on the screen. Some enemies move fast and become viewable a bit too late. Stupid train. Why not be able to zoom the camera out more or just see more by default? Other MMOs seem to get this down no problem. So why point all of this out? Why give Deca Games ideas that they should totally consider using? To explain to you all that RotMG is flawed at the foundation. There's not enough emphasis on the roguelike elements and not enough on the MMO aspects, which screws over players. Games in these genres keep getting better and better with new ideas being implemented into them and older ones being continually made stronger. RotMG seems to be missing old and new key features. And is there a reason for it? The game's been in development since 2010, so I don't think so. All it's doing is screwing over players by giving them a watered down roguelike and MMO experience, and we know that the game can be in a better state, but with how much money Deca Games makes through optimizing microtransactions, will it? And where does this leave us? It leaves us with a community divided by how RotMG is handled by Deca Games. The game's emphasis and encouragement for players to run for the best loot and the shortcuts that allow for this have contributed to this divide. But there's much more to it than that. Not only in the way of Discord runs, but because of the state of the game. People love it and people hate it. But does this hate come out of a bad place? I can't speak for everyone, but in a general sense, I don't think so. I think that if a game is fun but has underlying issues, animosity or bitterness can develop for that game, despite how much it's loved. So some people can turn the other cheek, ignore or play through the aspects people consider to be bad, but some people just get sick of it, and then they stop playing the game or feel sour about it. And that's where we're at as a whole. You take everyone who has an opinion on the game, mix them up in a big pot, and we have a love-hate relationship for this game. And that's that for the most part, but there's a few things I can quickly go over too. Some lovely commenters inform me that the seasonal characters are the game's version of PPE. For those who don't know, PPE stands for Pro Player Experience or Pet Player Experience. This is a challenge that players self-impose on themselves that has them starting at level 1 on a new character, not being able to access items from the vault or other material help, and not being able to trade. Some players go beyond that and apply other restrictions related to guilds, grouping, Discord runs. RotMG sort of gets that right in their seasonal characters. You still have access to your vault, but it's a new vault that lasts for as long as the season lasts, and you can complete seasonal missions for rewards. I did point out that a new quest system should be implemented into the game, and I gave suggestions for it, but I never talked about this quest system in this video. It's okay. A bit grindy, but it's okay. The rewards are pretty nice too, and the best part about it all is that once the season ends, everything you put in your seasonal vault makes its way back to your regular vault. But the downside is that your seasonal character is converted to a regular character. I still rather a more traditional MMO quest system to be in the game rather than this one, but it's a step in the right direction. A small step, mind you, but it's a shame that it's tied to seasons and a battle pass. I'm sure a lot of what I've said has already been said before, but I felt like I needed to talk a bit more about the game, specifically the things I missed in my last video. Plus, it's always nice to talk about this game and revisit certain discussion points every so often to analyze them and see if anything's changed for the better or worse, and then we can talk about them. I don't want to see this game fail, I want to see it shine, and I know a lot of other people think the same, even if they have negative views on the game. So, fingers crossed that it does get better, because it would be a shame to see this long-standing game crash and burn. With that being said, thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. And as always, here's a massive shout out to my patrons. You guys are legends. But what's your thoughts on all of this? Do you like the game? Hate it? Do you think it could get better, or will it continue to go downhill? Have you even played the game? Let me know in the comment section, and I'll catch ya in the next one.